Parking is an issue in almost every city and town. That's why MTC has been sponsoring 3 workshops in Oakland, San Jose, and Walnut Creek to help mayors, city councils, and city planners improve parking in your hometown.
Good morning. My name is Valerie Nepper. I'm with the Metropolitan Transportation Commission, and we're here to talk about parking policies. Why does MTC care about parking policies, and what's our role? Clearly, parking policies are part of local land use decision-making process. Why does MTC care? Because the collection of local parking policies have a regional impact. They impact development opportunities, they impact housing prices throughout the region, they impact small business viability, they impact vehicle miles of travel and greenhouse gases. These are all things that MTC cares about. We have goals, and we are developing strategies to try to meet those goals as per SB 375 and other regional goals. So we care a lot about these things, and clearly they're in the local purview, and we're trying to help you here. So our role is primarily one of offering technical assistance and support and guidance. When we do fund studies such as stationary plans, priority development plans, we look for analysis of parking and access policies and consideration of alternative policies here. So with that, I'd like to introduce Tom Bates.
Now, the people of Berkeley are probably like the people in your community. So what they really want to do, they want to find a place on the street, a parking space on the street with a broken meter, right? With a broken meter. That would be ideal for them. But we have decided that we're going to try to put in policies in place that encourage people to use for public transportation, or to walk, or to bicycle, or to get there by other means than a car. Every new building, every new commercial mixed-use building has to provide a bicycle parking. Is required to provide on-site some kind of car share, either city car share, zip car, some kind of car share that has to be available to people. They also have to provide a bus pass for everybody who lives there, every unit, and this not only in residential, but this is also in commercial. So anytime you build an office building or you build a new unit, you got to provide a bus pass. There's this development when you come into Berkeley on University on the right-hand side, the southern side, 4th and U. It's a huge development that took place there, right by the railroad track. And the people, when they were going through the approval process, I said, you got to provide a parking pass. And they were sort of reluctant to do that, but they said, okay, if that's what it takes, we'll do that. And then interestingly enough, once they got it built, it became like their number one sales point was this pass, because people could get this free bus pass, right? They paid for it in their rent. Free bus pass. They could go up on University Avenue and catch a bus, and they could be in San Francisco in no time at all. They can catch a bus. They could be downtown Berkeley, or they could be elsewhere. And people, we required 1 bus pass per unit. Would be free. And then they negotiated with AC Transit to say, no, we want to have one for the other person who lives in this unit. Can we get another deal on that? So that actually has been very encouraging that that's happened. But now it's required on all of our buildings to go forward.
And as Mayor Bates knows, and as many of you who've tried to change your parking policies know, there's also no better way of getting angry phone calls to your desk or making your re-election more challenging than getting smarter about parking. So why do parking policies matter? Well, it touches almost everything that we do in trying to run and manage cities, trying to better our economy, and trying to create a fairer society. And it touches our lives as well as residents. We care a lot about parking. We want a parking space right at our home. We want a space right in front of our home for our guests. And yet we also want to live in a leafy, walkable neighborhood and not next to a giant parking lot. As business owners, we also want a space right in front of our store for our customers. We need good parking for our employees in order to attract and retain our employees. And we also want for many of us, our business to be located in a walkable and interesting environment in order to be able to attract more customers. And we don't want a giant parking lot next to us that makes it more difficult to walk there, but we want a lot of parking. As a developer, We want a predictable approvals process. We want to make sure that we've got enough parking spaces in order to be able to attract tenants and buyers. But we don't want too many parking spaces so that it makes it infeasible to finance our development project. But we want enough parking spaces so that the lenders will actually give us money in order to be able to build it. As cities, we want to make sure that we've got enough parking spaces in our mixed-use areas and our neighborhoods in order to keep our residents happy, and in order to ensure that people can continue to shop in our downtowns. But we also don't want too much parking because it's expensive, and it takes up a lot of land, and it takes away opportunities for other kinds of revenue-producing and vitality-producing development. Similarly, as transit agencies, we want enough parking so that people who are living in more auto-dependent areas can have access to transit. But we have to be very careful about how much parking we provide. One, because it's expensive, and two, because surrounding our transit stops with parking means that we can't surround our transit stops with transit-oriented development. That parking is a great way of attracting riders who are in auto-dependent locations, but it's expensive, and it precludes our ability to create transit-oriented development and development-oriented transit. Similarly, as regional agencies, we see that there's a strong relationship between how we provide parking for housing and our ability to achieve our regional housing affordability goals. There's also a relationship between how much parking we provide and how we manage that parking and our ability to achieve our regional congestion management, air quality, and CO2 reduction goals. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. Parking also influences the design of our communities. This is, we will not tell you where this location is. It could be anywhere here in the Bay Area, but you can see that this is a mixed-use development project. There's some office, there's some housing down there in the lower right-hand corner, there's some retail in the lower left corner, there's also a transit stop just off the image in the top left. But you can see that in this community, where parking is provided based upon standard minimum parking requirements, that if you wanted to go from that office building in the middle to the restaurant across the street, you would probably get in your car and drive across the street. In many ways, the way we provide minimum parking requirements and parking management techniques creates a self-fulfilling prophecy of automobile dependency and increased congestion and air pollution. It also consumes a lot of land. And so if those are the roadways, that's how much parking our requirements require us to consume in our land area, setting aside far more land for our automobiles than we do for our citizens. Parking is also a big factor in influencing our day-to-day choices about how we get around. People make very rational decisions about how to get from A to B. A lot of it based upon travel time, some of it based upon price. And so if I need to go a mile in order to get a quart of milk, I've got maybe many options available to me. If I decided to walk, that would be free, but it would probably take me about 20 minutes. And the walk, depending upon where I'm at, may not be a very nice walk. If I wanted to take the bus or the train, maybe it would only take me 15 minutes, but it's going to cost me $2 each way. You know, that's maybe more than the quart of milk is going to cost me. If I were to ride my bike, that's also going to be free, and it may only take 10 minutes, and I can come and go whenever I want. But maybe the bike facilities aren't so great, or it's raining, or I need to carry a lot of stuff. Whereas if I'm going to be driving, I can come and go whenever I want, and it's maybe only going to take me 5 minutes. And from my perspective of somebody just getting in my car, it may seem to be free, even if it's actually costing me something, because I've already paid for the gas and the insurance. Parking also has a large bearing on housing affordability, and Mott Smith will talk to you more about these relationships later today. But for every parking space that we require in a residential unit, it increases the cost of that unit by at least 10%. And it reduces the number of units that we can build in a typical parcel. So while many of our parking requirements are very well intended, they have a whole set of negative unintended consequences that we need to think about as we decide how to require and manage our parking spaces. So what goes into creating a parking space? Well, the first thing that you need to start off with is a chunk of land. And we'll ignore land costs for a moment and just talk about construction costs. A simple surface parking lot costs about $5,000 per space. If you want to add structures, you want to add levels to that, above ground, figure about $25,000 per space. Costs vary a lot in this region. We've seen much higher costs and some that are a little bit lower, but that's a typical rule of thumb. Below ground, it's going to cost you more, typically about $35,000 per space, and depending upon soil conditions, can go upward dramatically from there. But even though parking is expensive, we still find in almost all communities that people believe, because, I don't know, it's in the Second Amendment or Leviticus somewhere, that parking shall be free. Parking structures are great. They can be an incredibly effective way of being able to provide parking and walkability at the same time by concentrating it together, so that you can provide a sufficient number of parking spaces while having lots of development around it and lots of good walkability. But just like with surface spaces and other aspects of parking, parking structures are expensive, and so we need to think about them clearly as we're making decisions about whether to build parking structures or not. As a motorist, there are few things that I enjoy more than seeing a lot of empty parking spaces right in front of where I want to be. But as an economist, every empty parking space that I see is an extraordinary waste of money. Money that could have been spent on something else, whether it be development or wider sidewalks or street trees or lower taxes. Empty parking spaces are throwing money away. And so one of the first rules about thinking about parking structures is making sure that you're making most effective use out of the parking that you already have before you start building anything new. In fact, this is the #1 rule of sustainability. It is always more sustainable to make more effective use of your existing resources than it is to acquire or build new resources. And as I said, parking is expensive. While it only costs about $5,000 per space to build a parking lot, once you factor in the land cost and the operations and maintenance costs and other utility costs, in the suburbs, a surface parking lot costs about $70 to $120 per space per month, or a few dollars a day. And if you're not charging the users for that, what you're doing is you're taxing everyone in order to write a check to people who drive for a few dollars each day to park in your parking lot. In downtown locations where land is more expensive, construction costs go up a little bit, but your land costs and operating costs go up a lot more. And it costs about $300 to $500 per month per space to provide a surface parking lot, or at least $10 a day. $10 to $20 a day is what it costs to provide parking in a downtown. And these are just the hard costs. It does not include any of the soft costs or the externalities or the opportunity costs. These are simple, conservative, fixed, hard numbers. Parking structures cost more in capital, but in a high land value environment, you save so much in the land that you end up saving money in your total monthly costs once you amortize all of your expenses. So it's going to cost you a lot more to build, but the monthly cost is only about $350 to $400 a month. Still a lot, but cheaper oftentimes than doing a surface lot in the downtown. In a suburban location, $25,000 construction, $180 to $300 per month per space. Still, $20 per day to provide parking at, for example, a BART station. That's how much BART is writing a check to the users who drive to BART and want to park at BART. There are very good reasons for providing parking at BART stations and in downtowns, but we have to keep in mind the actual costs that are involved and think about whether there are alternatives for achieving our access goals that are more cost effective. All of you have a big, ugly arterial in your communities. So imagine that is whatever big, ugly arterial you've got. And here's how we typically provide development along that arterial. You've got school and shop and work and play. And our minimum parking requirements that are separated by land use ensure that there are separate parking lots, and those parking lots are bigger than our land use. And you imagine a typical trip. So dad drives Sally to school, drops her off. That requires a parking space. Then he goes to work and he parks there. And then he's got to go on his lunch break to pick Sally up and drive her across the street to soccer practice, because of course she can't walk herself across the big ugly arterial. And then he goes and he does some shopping, he picks up the groceries, he goes and he picks Sally up, and off he goes home. And obviously this is a much compressed, idealized sort of trip, but it's the sort of thing that many of us do every day in our lives. And it's a mess, right? And not only is it a lot of driving, but it's a lot of turning movements off of our big arterial, turning movements that are having a disproportionate impact on congestion. So imagine instead we have the same arterial, but we've got a grid of streets, and many of you have a historic downtown that does just this, where you arrange development along your main street and you share parking so that parking takes up less space, and some of it is surface and some of it is structure. Now imagine the same trip. Dad drives Sally, he parks, Sally walks herself to school while dad goes to work, and Sally can now walk herself across the skinny street in order to get to a soccer practice, and dad can easily pick up the errands at lunch, and they can meet together at the car, and off they go and they go home. This is the exact same trip, but radically different results simply because of the way that we've arranged land uses and dealt with parking. 1/2 of the parking is necessary, and this is based upon real data from communities here in the Bay Area. Less than 1/2 of the land area, or twice as much economic development capacity for the same amount of investment and the same amount of traffic. 1/4 of the arterial trips, 1/6 of the arterial turning movements, and less than 1/4 of the vehicle miles traveled, a 75% reduction in traffic, simply because we've arranged land uses and parking focused on the pedestrian rather than focused on a single parking space for every trip. Another key point that I want to leave you with is, if you do decide to go on the adventure of charging for parking, the right price for parking is always the lowest price at which a few spaces are always available. As supply increases, price goes down. As price increases, demand goes down. And that in order to balance supply and demand for any good in our society, we've got a limited number of approaches, the most effective of which is setting the right price.
Thanks, Valerie. I'm going to be reinforcing a lot of things that Jeff said and Mayor Bates mentioned earlier. So this is how we handle things in Berkeley. First, what you need to do is you need to manage what you have really well, okay? And there's 3 pieces to that. Fully use what's available, what's already there. Match demand with supply, and price and information are a couple ways to do that. And then promote alternatives. And so this first piece really is looking at sort of the public side of the parking equation. You know, the public garages, the public, what's on street, and also the private garages that are publicly available. Interestingly, the downtown area plan was developed in a collaborative way with the University of California. It was actually a partnership. And staff worked, the university staff and the city staff, we worked very collaboratively on problems. And parking, of course, was an issue that we both had an interest in. And what we discovered is that the parking lots and garages in and around the downtown cleared out in the late afternoon. And so early on in the process, the university made that parking available after 5 o'clock and put up signage so that people can find it. So, we increased our supply without having to build anything. This is the Gaia building. It's the first building in the United States that used parking lifts. In fact, Patrick Kennedy, the developer of the building, I think he had the license for these parking lifts for a long time in the U.S. Other providers have come in. And you're seeing them in a lot more places. And it uses the same amount of aisle space, but you can get 2 or 3 times the number of cars using the same amount of aisle space.
My presentation is about us. It's called The Greedy Developer and How to Put Us to Work for You. This is a typical commercial lot, and I would argue this is a typical lot in any city. It's 50 feet wide by 150 feet deep. It's a standard, streetcar suburb lot, and that's what probably exists on that lot if you've got a pre-war building on it. And this is the thing that most planners I know wish developers would build. They wish that they would build a zero lot line project with a cafe and there's a bike corral in the street in front, and it's very efficient. And frankly, as a developer, I like it because I've got 7,500 square feet that I'm collecting rent on. It's pretty good. Unfortunately, if I went to the city and put in an application to do a retail store, that is what I would be allowed to build by right. So again, thinking about what could I get approved over the counter versus what am I going to be asking for waivers, variances, modifications, specific plan approvals, whatever. My head starts to spin when I think about that. And this again is what I can get stamped immediately. And so I'm thinking, unless it's worth 2 years of my life and the risk of lawsuits and $100,000 extra, I'm just going to build this liquor store. If I go in and I want to do a food use, I think unless it's worth 2 years of my life, $100,000, lawsuits, blah, 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 I'm just going to build this Taco Bell. And again, next time you're driving around and you're wondering why it is that everything's a liquor store, auto shop, or Taco Bell, this is your answer. That these are the things that I can get approved. And it's not because this is what the market wants. It's because what the market wants isn't so much more valuable than this that I'm willing to endure 2 years of hell and the risk that I could lose everything to a lawsuit. So again, these are the things that we have inadvertently said are the uses we want because we've made them easy and they satisfy parking code. These are the uses we've inadvertently disincentivized by forcing them into these sort of alternative processes. I'm going to show you, this is a picture of a guy named Tom Gilmore, who was one of the first developers in Los Angeles to see the value in the historic core. About 10 or 12 years ago, when he built this building, the San Fernando building, this was Skid Row. And in fact, this building was actually the headquarters of the Los Angeles Housing Department. And then all around it was just nothing, no uses above the first floors in the buildings, terrible, terrible problems with deferred maintenance, crime, vagrancy, etc. And he said, I want to build these units for people who want to have an urban lifestyle and who can actually see the future of that urban lifestyle before it actually exists on the ground. And there's no parking in the building, no parking at all. And I had the good fortune of being a journalist at the time working for a development newsletter, and I had just come from an Urban Land Institute meeting with multifamily developers, and some poor guy in the audience asked these multifamily developers, how come none of you are building in downtown Los Angeles? And they laughed and laughed and laughed, and they said, it's obvious why we're not building in downtown Los Angeles, because everybody wants to drive, everybody wants a swimming pool, everybody wants a gym, everybody wants sort of a really California style, courtyard apartment building with lots of light and sunshine, and they don't want the urban thing. If they want the urban thing, they go to New York or Chicago or San Francisco or whatever it is. They don't want it. And so I got to ask Tom Gilmore this question, and this was his answer to me, that we live in a region of 18 million people, and I only need 200 who are going to prefer what I'm offering. And it turns out he was right. This is a picture of that district today. It is absolutely hopping. This is on a monthly night they call Art Walk, but now every single building is occupied. They created thousands and thousands and thousands of units through this thing called the Adaptive Reuse Ordinance that allowed people to convert commercial space to residential without parking and without satisfying other zoning requirements. It created tons of middle-income units, revitalized an urban core, all without parking, and proved that even in Los Angeles, you can do something that people think is completely impossible, and it's only been good for the city. Given that it's very difficult for cities to do these rezoning exercises themselves, even when they know that they want to, Assemblywoman Skinner from Berkeley is putting forward a bill, in fact, it's probably published today, called AB 904, the Sustainable Parking Standards Act of 2012. Here's what it does. First of all, it's going to reduce parking requirements in transit areas, maximum of 1 space required per 1,000 square feet of commercial, maximum of 1 space per unit required in market rate residential, and 0.5 spaces for affordable projects. It'll give developers flexibility to build as much as they think is needed because it will not set parking maximums. It only caps the minimums. It'll give cities TOD zoning at no cost and with no staff times. That $250,000 to $500,000 figure that's keeping cities from doing this, that is erased by this legislation. And importantly, it recognizes that there might be places where you really want local standards that are higher than this for a variety of reasons. And it gives cities the ability to keep those standards in place also without any cost or any staff time simply by adopting findings. So it gives cities the option of choosing whether they want the new standards or the old standards, again, without the current process of spending gazillions of dollars. It's not a mandate that will force cities to swallow something they don't want to swallow. If a city wants to keep higher parking standards, all they have to do is adopt findings and keep the same standards they have. But for those cities who want to change their parking standards, but who are, again, running into this cost issue, running into the politics issue, it's a free pass to much more sustainable, much more economically sound parking requirements.
We hope this has been useful to you, and we would love to hear more about what you would find useful for MTC to do to help you in your work in your local jurisdictions.